This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. It's another of my Actors on Acting series. Kay Adshead, a British actress, is my guest, and the conversation will begin in a moment. The subject is Kay Adshead. She is a British actress that I saw a few months ago with my wife on an old play for TV written and directed by Mike Lee called Kiss of Death. She herself is also a playwright, as well as a poet and actor. And mostly it looks like from your background, you've devoted most of the time to the theater rather than film or television. But we'll talk about all of that once we get going. So, Kay, welcome. Usually I give people, when I do the non-acting interviews, I'll ask them to give a series of statements about who they are, what they do. But with the actors, I like to ask the questions. So you grew up then in the 1950s early on. Tell me about where you grew up. You grew up in the Manchester area. Was it working class? You know, what kind of life growing up did you have? Artistic parents?
Well, the first 5 years of my life was spent in Cheetham Hill, Manchester, which is a robust working class area in a little cobbled street with it, we lived in what is called two up, two downs, which is just little terraced houses next to each other.
Mm.
And opposite, we had the great privilege of living opposite a rag and bone man. Don't you know what rag and bone men are?
I know the Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart by Yeats, but
Well, rag and bone men in Manchester had usually had yards, and they had a horse
mm,
and had a cart, and they went round and going rag and bone, making all these, and then people would come out and give their rubbish, and they would sell them. So
mm,
we lived opposite one of those,
ah,
and on a cobble street. When I think about all that, it's like something from Angela's Ashes or something. But
mm,
that really is the beginning, the first 5 years of my life, which is very vivid and had a strong impression. And then when I was five, because I had a very clever father who also came from a very working class background, but had had an interesting war. He was a navigator in the RAF, and he was
mm.
very clever. He went to night school, and he worked his way out of Cheetham Hill to Stretford, which is a more middle class, or certainly a leafier part of Manchester.
Mm.
And so I was there until I was 18, and then of course I went to RADA to train as an actress. So the first 5 years of my life was proper hardcore working class life. Yeah.
So, did you have a television when you were young in your home?
Well, this is interesting. Well, I remember us getting a television, but we only got BBC. But just down the road, there was a lady. Everybody was your aunties in those days. It was Auntie Ezzard. She was an old lady, and they got ITV.
Mm.
And we used to go in there and sit on her table to watch Popeye.
Ah,
And um, and she let me drink pop from her gravy bowl,
uh-huh.
which I thought was very posh. And so yeah, got a television when I was five. Remember Quatermass? Have you ever heard of Quatermass?
Yeah, the Quatermass experience
No, yeah.
experiment.
That was the first thing that, I mean, I was only five. I wasn't allowed to watch it, but
Yeah.
everybody, the streets kind of emptied, and everybody went to watch Quatermass. And
Yeah.
yeah, and my father was an engineer, and he built this kind of really strange thing, this remote. He made a paper mache green bowl, and it was remote, and all the kids came out to watch this paper mache green ball move around the street. So those are my memories, my
How
early childhood memories.
how about films? Did you was it mostly British films that you saw, or American?
Well, we went to what we call the pictures,
Hmm.
and the first picture that I ever saw was Jason and the Argonauts.
Oh, a great B film. I've done that. In fact, I think Tom Hanks, the actor, said
I
as a kid
saw
he
that.
thought it was the greatest film of all time.
Saw that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the first film I ever went to see, and I was absolutely terrified by it and
Uh-huh.
traumatized. I think I had post-traumatic stress after I came out of it because I was a terribly imaginative kid, and I was far too young to see it.
The Black Eyes of Talos.
It was just all terrifying.
Yeah.
I just found the whole thing. I
Yeah.
went with my father, not my mum. I went with my father and my brother, and that's the first thing. But we didn't go to the pictures really
Yeah.
very much.
Really.
It was just not something that we did.
So were you an outgoing child? You had to be the center of attention when the aunts and uncles gathered. You know, you're dancing or singing or.
Well, I would have liked to have been. That was the inner Kay Adshead, but I wasn't allowed to be anything like that. We grew up in a house in which you were modest and you didn't show off. And if you did show off, it was kind of frowned on. And I was like one of the, me, look at me, please me. And, everything was like, that whack attack game. You were all kind of hammered back
Yeah.
down again. I had wonderful parents. I had wonderful, lovely, decent parents. They were shy, decent, modest, hardworking people. And no kind of, great, extrovertness was really tolerated much. And when we went to Stretford, I mean, some of my neighbours really, were horrified by me, I think, by my natural exuberance. Just wasn't, it was frowned upon, really.
So what was the first exhibition of your inner creative self? Were you a drawer? Were you writing little limericks? Were you writing poems? Were you thinking of playing with your stuffed animals and, having them act out things?
Well, when I was 5 and went to school, we had a fantastic teacher called Mrs. Fenelon. Came from New Zealand, and she used to have carpet time in school, and the kids used to be invited to go and sit on the carpet and tell a story. And kids used to go on there, and I mean, you couldn't get me off the carpet because my stories would have been like 2 hours long. They were epics, and you made them up. You made these stories up, and it was just like heaven for me. I mean, and I just used to go back at night and think about what the story I would do again and what would be my next story. I just made up these stories and told them to the other kids, and that's my first thing that I just was, I just loved doing.
So, how well aware were you of your living condition? By that I mean, I remember as a child myself when I was about 4 or 5. I was born in '65. There's a photograph of me with another little boy who was the grandson of one of my dad's friends, and I remember asking him. This was like in '69 because my dad he hated LBJ, he hated Nixon as president. And I remember asking him, I said, so what do you think of President Nixon? And I saw, here's a 5-year-old boy asking another 5-year-old boy. So I was aware of that kind of sense of we were working class people and my dad hated Nixon and whatnot. Were you someone that when you were with other children, you were like, say, Susie doesn't seem too bright. I tell her things, she doesn't understand them, kind of.
A really interesting question,
Yeah.
because I moved from Cheetham Hill, which was a really poor area, and I was quite a savvy enough kid to know that I'd gone from living with poor people to living with posh people.
Posh.
And they were posh. And I desperately wanted to be posh. I was the biggest little snob at 5 years old, and I wanted to be, I just that was I was quite a camp kind of 5-year-old kid in this very, ordinary suburban background. So, and do you know Enid Blyton, Dan?
Who?
Have you heard of Enid Blyton?
No, I don't know the name.
Well, Enid Blyton is a kind of iconic British children's author.
Ah, okay.
And she wrote things like The Famous Five Go to Whatever or Do Something. And it was all terribly, terribly, and all the children were frightfully posh and, very middle class and had daddies who were bankers and accountants. And I aspired at a very young age to be posh and to live that kind of life and have sticky out dresses on, and go on picnics and have midnight feasts. And I grew up on that. So very, very strange, very odd.
Were you an avid reader as a child?
Yeah. Completely. Could read before I went to school because of my mum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was always a little bit of a freak. Yeah.
But did you read fiction? Did you read science books? Did you read anything that came your way?
Just great stories,
Yeah.
But on top of that, my dad had from the war, he had a bookcase full of it was a book club that they were members of, not a working club. Aspirational working class people joined this book club, and in that bookshelf there was some really like Pearl Buck people you won't know, but these
I
writers
know
that
Pearl
were really,
Buck.
really unusual for kids to read. You know, I'm talking about being older.
Yeah.
And Monica Dickens, he joined this book club. And so I went and read these really quite unusual books for a kid quite early on.
How about since in your latter days here, you are a poet and playwright.
Mm.
Did you read Philip Larkin, or did you read T.S. Eliot? Did you what did you were you given on your 10th birthday the collected plays of Shakespeare, or what?
Well, I won actually I was did verse speaking competitions at school.
Mm.
And this is when I was at grammar school, so 11 plus, and I got the complete works of Shakespeare. And I also got, the modern verse compilation as well.
Hmm.
But I did. I'm not saying Philip Larkin particularly, but I was an avid reader and I did read a lot. But I also did, I was also wanting to do stuff
Hmm.
and be stuff and make stuff, make shows. I was always making neighborhood shows for good causes, which was why the neighbors were very suspicious. I mean, I was just a bit out there.
Uh, yeah, I know. When God forbid someone be a little bit different and be a little bit outgoing and want to experience things differently than normal folks. But so the acting bug. Did you see a Grace Kelly performance? Did you? I mean, and how did you know? Oh, I want to act.
Well, there's nobody in my family who is very theatrical or interested in theatre. But I have a very vivid memory. The wanting to tell stories with Mrs. Fenelon and Carpet Time. But I remember the first play we did, which must have been a year later, so I must have been about 6, and it was The Ugly Duckling.
Mm.
And we had this really bloke teacher who was really boring. He was nothing like Mrs. Fenelon, and he was doing this production. And I remember he cast me as one of just the ducks that toddles along. And I remember thinking, you got it so wrong. I should be that main part, and you are going to regret that because that's what I should be doing. And I mean, why I thought that I don't know, but I mean, I just really loved forming and telling stories and making shows like
Uh,
Nicky Rooney, and Judy Garland
mm.
in the backyard, in the garden. It was just like that.
Ugly Duckling. That's Hans Christian Andersen, is that?
But it was just that story he was
Yeah,
telling with little children.
yeah.
But I mean, he wouldn't cast me in a big part or anything, and I just knew I should be playing that big part.
So that's with the Stretford Children's Theatre.
No,
Oh,
that was at school. I didn't
oh,
go to Stretford Children's Theatre
oh.
until a lot later, but
Okay.
that was absolutely fun because by the time I went to secondary school, I was doing a lot of acting, and I went to Stretford Children's Theatre and I did a lot of acting there, and that was brilliant. But I also acted a lot at school as well, in school plays. I did Antigone.
Mm.
I did Kate Hardcastle and She Stoops to Conquer.
Yeah.
Things that were but way out of my remit, but I just did it.
Mm.
And loved it. Loved acting at school, and loved the Stretford Children's Theatre.
Did you prefer the ancient plays, the Greek plays, or the Shakespeare plays? Did you prefer modern plays, or
I
any?
didn't care what it was, as long
Yeah.
as I was up there in a frock and people were watching me. I didn't care. I mean, I wasn't terribly discerning. I mean, I just loved acting. Comedy, serious stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, I didn't know. I look at it now and I think, how did I do that part of Kate Hardcastle
Yeah.
at 12 and She Stoops to Conquer? I didn't have a clue what that play was about, but
Mm.
somehow I did it. It's just strange. It's just weird. It's an anomaly. I don't know why.
So you later then went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. Is this as a teenager, at college age?
I was 18. I went straight from school and I
Mm.
went to RADA.
Okay.
And that was completely, that was left field. That was something that was I hadn't expected that to really happen.
So did you
So that,
apply for it, or did?
oh yeah, I applied for art because I was very interested in doing art, and I applied for university, and I applied for RADA, and I thought, well, whatever I get in,
Uh-huh.
I will. And I got into a smaller drama school, And then I went for my RADA audition and I got into RADA. And my mum was in a real flap because she said, oh, you know, it'll be a lot of money and oh, it'll be very hard. And my dad just said, no, let's see if we can make it work. And I went at 18 to RADA.
So,
Unbelievable.
so before I just ask you a little bit about the techniques and stuff you were learned, it says, and I'm using the Wikipedia article on you. So if there's anything wrong, it's Wikipedia. So take it for what it is. It says that you won the Emil Littler Award for Outstanding Talent and the Brian Mosley Award for an individual skill in stage fighting. Were you
Yeah.
on stage kicking the asses of other girls?
I won, well, or anybody. No, I won the stage fight. He was a very good stage fighter when I left RADA at 18. And I went on to do to learn wrestling, to do Tansy in Trafford Tansy later on. I was very interested in physical theatre rather than standy about speaking acting,
Uh-huh.
which was very RADA. RADA was very word centric, you know. But I didn't, and I won the Emil Littler Award. Yeah.
So, so stage
I have to
fighting.
say, everybody wins something at RADA. Nobody comes away empty-handed. So don't be too excited.
So when you say stage fighting, is this sort of like professional wrestling where moves are scripted?
No, I did that later. I
Uh-huh.
did Tansy, Trafford Tansy later, but I did stage fighting. I did fencing. I won
Ah,
the fence.
okay, okay,
It
stage.
was fencing that I won.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay. I was thinking something like Orson Welles' Voodoo Hamlet, where everyone's running around and just rolling on top of and people.
I wish. I
Yeah.
wish. That sounds fabulous.
Um, so let's talk a little bit though about your philosophy about acting, if indeed you have one. From what you've said thus far, it seems that you're open to just about anything in terms of subject matter, in terms of how to approach it, in terms of how to exploit it in the best sense of the word. But you just said you seem to be more into the physicality of it than anything else.
Well, only because I was exuberant and young,
Uh huh.
and all the rest of it. But I went to RADA, which is very word centric. It's a classical training, and so I came out of RADA, and RADA was a bit of a strange time because I was a little bit younger than a lot of the other people there, and they seemed to me to be a lot older
Hmm.
than me. And so I came out of RADA a bit of kind of flux, I think, not knowing what acting was, and probably more confused when I came out than when I went in, to be absolutely honest.
Uh-huh.
And I can't remember if I and acting was just intuitive and instinctive, and I didn't learn. Acting doesn't teach you, didn't teach you then. It was with Hugh Crockle, who was a wonderful man, but you weren't taught any techniques. It was very democratic in that way. There was no technique. You learned about Stanislavski and all the rest of it, but you weren't actually encouraged to follow a particular method.
It was a more pragmatic approach. The end result mattered.
Well, it was very short course and it was very performance orientated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just short of 3 years, and you were on a great big stage on the Vanbrugh, acting your socks off, almost within 7 weeks or 8 weeks of going there.
Mm-hmm.
Very professional, biased. You were going out there to be a professional performer and earn your living and blah blah blah, and to become a star really, because RADA is a great star maker. So I left rather a little bit kind of confused. Now, I can't remember if it was I read Uta Hagen before I think I did before I worked with Mike Lee.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, but I don't know how. I anticipated this question and I tried to think when who introduced me to respect for acting? Who was it? And I can't remember. But when I read Respect for Acting, it was like a light bulb. No, it was like a bomb went off inside me, because I found the book so riveting and exciting. And it was a little bit like I'd been driving a car all those years without any lessons, without ever having a single driving lesson, going through red lights, screeching to a halt, going off road and all the rest of it. And when I read Uta Hagen, it was mind-blowing for me, absolutely mind-blowing, because I just thought this is just the whole notion of respect for acting as well was something that moved me immensely, because I do think prior, I do think acting is, you know, in those days, it was, fluff, a bit fluff and flam, and if you were pretty, and if you were, you were guided into a certain way, and you were cast in a certain way, and your life was a certain thing. And the phrase "respect for acting" I found very powerful, and I just have to say I love acting,
Mm.
because I find it the most um, fascinating thing. It uses every single bit of you. You've got to be very clever to be. It uses your intellect. It uses your physicality, and it uses your imagination in a completely unique way to anything else.
So, do you then see acting, generally speaking, generally, as a way to get away from your everyday existence, or the way to be the most Kay that you can be?
Neither, honestly, neither of those things. No, I just find the whole process, the whole idea of becoming somebody else to the nth degree,
Mm-hmm.
and telling that story with as much integrity and truthfulness, and value added, more than that, because you're also not just serving a person, but you're serving the writer
Mm.
and the director's vision of the piece and the style of the piece and what the story is saying. I found it, for the most part. Obviously I had lots of times when I couldn't use that, and that was very frustrating, and when that's stamped on, particularly as a young, lightweight, what they thought I was, a young lightweight, you know pretty in inverted commas, small young actress. Yeah.
Here in America, if you look especially on film or television, there's a certain way that Americans that act, unless you have a really like outstanding director like a John Cassavetes who's willing to take chances. Most American acting is very this I speak, you speak, I speak, you speak, and everything is framed. Whereas if you look at some of the classic directors from Europe, Bergman, world cinema, Kurosawa, um, you look, the actors seem to recognize a full body portrayal. I think of like if you ever seen Bergman's The Virgin Spring, where Max von Sydow, the knight, is looking down at the river where his daughter was murdered, and we see him from the back about 20, 30 feet away. We don't see him crying. We don't, but we just see the slump of his body. And to me, that's far more powerful than the usual melodramatic hand wringing, oh, my mother's dying of breast cancer kind of thing that we've seen 1,000 times. When it comes to acting, or if you're given a role, do you prefer uh, do you prefer one way of doing it to another, or what?
Well, what you have to remember is that I work with Mike Lee. The big changing point, or the best thing I've ever done. That's what's so to do that so early on. It was a bit of a shame, really, because it's been very hard to top. But I worked with Mike Lee in that play for today that you
Yeah.
saw, and that was nothing like RADA. It was about as far away from a RADA training as you possibly could get. And working with Mike Lee was an absolute. I'm very proud of what I did in it. I think he's a genius director and a genius auteur director, and it was that completely changed my whole view of my practice
Mm.
totally.
Well, let's just get on that thing for a moment. I know when because I saw that on the Criterion channel here in the U.S. I think Criterion goes under a different name in Europe, but I had seen Mike Lee. My wife is a big Mike Lee fan, and I enjoy his films too. I have to say, when I saw those 9 films that he did, it's sort of like kitchen sink comedy in some ways, but there's a realness to it, and even in his best films, which are often quite good, I think that early stuff has a grit and a reality and a power that's very rare. So let's just talk about, if you can, so what the particular play that you were in, your role, and just how you were cast there.
Well, before I worked with Mike Lee, I'd seen him on television, and I saw the play he did called Hard Labour.
Mm.
And I literally I watched it and I couldn't breathe because it was so familiar to me and it spoke to me because it was very similar to my own grandma and my own background.
When you
And
mentioned that earlier, I thought of hard labor.
absolutely. And I mean, and I just thought Elizabeth's performance was like, and it was like nothing else I'd ever seen. I mean, obviously, I grew up, I mean, I was born in 1954, so kitchen sink drama, you know, I was growing up with it. I wasn't an evolved young artist, but it was around and it was influencing me. But I saw that, and then I don't suppose I thought about it again. And then I left RADA, and then an advertisement in the stage was for young actors from Manchester. So, I mean, it's crazy, you know, you answer an advert in stage, which is normally like for, you know, dressing up and being a waitress or something. And I answered this advert and I met Mike Lee and I got cast as a girl. You don't know, I don't know if people, you won't know how Mike Lee works, but you know, he has a premise for the film, but of course he has no script, of course, and no characters. So the first thing that you do with Mike Lee is that you sit, and you're all separate. You all the cast work completely separately from each other for a long time. So Mike Lee, I met with him, and he asked me to come up with people um, that I knew within this remit of. I can't remember what the remit was. Don't forget, this is 40 odd years ago. But anyway, so I came up with people that I was at school with, and we came up with one character, and that character for me became the basis. I believe he works slightly differently now, and now he does work with amalgams. He didn't in my day. So I did it. I chose this. She was the basis of the character. She was actually called Leslie, and she became my character, Linda Fitton. And for a long time, you just had improvisations on your own, watched by him. And so you just become her, and you do a very complex backstory that is supported by solo improvisations. So, say for example, just going out to the shops as Linda, you know, as her. Obviously, she was very, very different, very, very different to me. So going out to the shops, and then gradually he introduces you to the other characters. My first improvisation, I was I'd met I was a temp working in an office, and I met the other girl who played Sandra, the other actress in it, and then gradually the improvisation. Then my next one was in a pub, and I met the guy who played the Undertaker's assistant, and I mean, it was like heaven on earth. It was just like playing at its greatest level, you know. I mean, I remember being that character, Linda, and I was coming back from an improvisation, and she was obviously she was a bit naughty character and a bit out there, and she was eating chips, and she was throwing old chips and paper into people's gardens, and all these BBC flunkies were coming and picking up, you know, all the paper from all the gardens. But I mean, you know, you just did it. And it was just like heaven. I mean, I can't describe what that project was like. I mean, and I just loved it. And it changed me as an artist completely.
I was going to say, because it seems to me, just from just having talked to you for 25 minutes, whatever it is so far, it seems to me that Lee's approach seems to be something that would have been very in sync with you. When you write a play, do you write down everything and then send it to the actor, or do you do that improvisation with them and create a play that way?
No, because what you have to remember about me is that I write in blank verse. I
Oh,
write
okay.
a lot of my plays are verse. And in actual fact, ironically and perversely, I'm kind of like naturalism kind of doesn't isn't my thing and doesn't kind of turn me on. Um, because you know I write in verse basically, and or I write at my best in verse. Thatcher's Women, my first play, was not in verse, but it had a very poetic premise. It had a very poetic subtext. And gradually I morphed away from naturalism when I wrote The Bogus Woman, where I really found my voice as a writer, and that was written in verse. Writing in verse frees me from having to be, you know, naturalistic. It means I am more hardwired to the poetry of the piece and the poetry of me than if I have to, you know, Do you want a cup of tea? All that naturalism doesn't turn me on. You see, I don't think Mike Lee is naturalistic. I think he's hyper naturalistic.
Mm.
I think it's a hyper realism in a way.
So are you more drawn to Pinter and Beckett?
Well, my favorite play in the whole world is Waiting for Godot.
Uh-huh.
I mean, is there anybody alive who that isn't the favorite play of? I mean, it's just, I mean, I saw that when I went to the Repertory Theatre when I was in my teens in Manchester, and I was, I don't think I could speak after I saw that play. When when the relationship between when the relationship between Pozzo and Lucky has changed, when that changed, and I watched that, I I was speechless. It was so wonderful. I mean, and I just think Beckett is, the god of playwriting, for sure.
That's interesting coming because most people will sort of knee jerkily say, of course, Shakespeare. So what is it about? I mean, I assume then you probably read Malloy, Malone Dies, and everything he's written then.
A long time ago, so don't quiz me on it.
Okay.
I mean, a long, long time ago. I mean, I only recently saw Waiting for Godot again,
Mm.
and it had exactly the same effect on me. The second time I saw it, I just love Beckett. Yeah, completely.
Let me just talk a little bit about some of the acting process. Now, you say that you're not really a naturalist. So, when do you know when someone doesn't get the role when you're doing a non-naturalistic play? If you're doing the Iceman Cometh, you can tell when someone's not in the naturalistic mode of that bar and that time and that. But if you're doing something that's naturally over the top, how do you know when a character or an actor isn't working? Especially if it's someone that, let's say, you and that person are the two main characters in a work.
Well, I don't think I can do good. I could do naturalism good.
Yeah.
I mean, worked, obviously, I've worked mainly in theatre, but I mean, I have done quite a lot of very naturalistic things. I mean, I did a film called Acceptable Levels, which was based in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. We lived there for, I think it was about 14 to 16 weeks on what they then called Murder Mile. And I think that performance I give in there as a BBC researcher, I think that's very naturalistic,
Mm.
total naturalism. And I've done a lot of naturalism on stage. What you call naturalism, that is that it has to be real and it has to be in the moment. I mean, I've done loads of it.
Mm.
It's not that I don't do naturalism. That's me as a writer. I mean, I'm a jobbing actress, earning a living. And if I'm working with a director who wants me to go in and do steaming and, they want my Cockney accent to be absolutely perfect, my Cockney accent will be absolutely perfect. I can
Mm.
promise you that much. So I do a lot of theatre naturalism. That was really my writing. My writing is heightened
Uh-huh.
as a writer.
Let me just ask you about the general state of the arts in the UK. I think here in the U.S., art basically went in the toilet around 1980 when Reagan came along. When in the 40 plus years since, uh, the, nothing really of any value is published in terms of novels. The movies here have become cartoon level crap, superhero stuff. Television, even though they'll talk about The Sopranos or Mad Men, if that's I don't look at either of them. I don't know what your opinion is, but I don't look at them as exemplars of any great particular thing. Uh, is the UK sort of down in the dumps? Are people do they just not care about the arts? Like here in the US, it's like the arts are just dead or at least comatose. What is the state in the UK artistically?
Well, let me talk about being in both countries, and let me say a cheery thing to you as an American,
Okay.
and something that will warm the cockles of your heart, I'm sure. Which is that when I was in America, and of course I worked over there, I got my green card in 2015, working in Houston. And what I loved about my time working, I worked at Match in Houston, which is a sort of a community, really groovy, really beautiful space, really, really beautiful, and encourages a lot of community engagement. Well, what I loved about working in America was that they were happy for me to do anything
Mhm.
there. It didn't matter that, because I did Stormy the Opera there, it didn't matter that I wrote it, that I, you know, designed it, did the costumes, I did everything like when I was a kid and, in the garden. They just thought that was cool, and good for me that I was doing all that thing. But the UK is very snobbish about people who do more than one thing. Now, it is getting better, for sure. There are a lot of very talented female actresses now who are writing and producing. Of course, I'm very old, so it was very hard for me. I more or less had to give up acting to become a writer. I wasn't really allowed to do both.
Mm.
And there was a kind of a sort of a sourness, like if you're writing, not getting any acting jobs now, sad about that. And if you're acting and doing well, giving up the writing, then, it's not very friendly for people who do more than one thing in the UK. Whereas in the US, where I was, I can only speak from my own experience. People were happy for me to do whatever I wanted. And I did a one-woman show out there called The Slug Sabbatical, which was a piece that had been published by Faber years ago. So I found the creative scene in Houston, working with that theatre, working with small theatres, Mildred's Umbrella, they took a play of mine and we did it. I found it very creative. Um,
So you're saying even on the small level of a small theater company, the U.S. is more progressive, if we want to say, than the UK?
no, that's not right. It's
Mm.
not progressive because at all because they're different. Actually, I think probably if you're really talking about progressive and doing innovative theatre, I think the UK is probably ahead
Uh,
of the US in terms of the kind of theatre that they produce.
yeah.
It was just more generous hearted. They
Okay.
just had bigger hearts in terms of what they would let you do and didn't worry about. And I found that refreshing. And you'll find a lot of British people who go and work in America will come back and say the same thing. You know, there is a feeling that you're being greedy. If you're writing the play and you're acting it, it's a bit greedy. Come on, give someone else a chance. That's the kind of feeling in the UK. Whereas in the US, sure, you've written a fantastic role. You're a great actress. Do it yourself. It's a different kind of psychology going on.
You spoke about theater and the difference here between the UK and the US. Some actors that I've interviewed and some that I've just known from small theater over the years, the decades, they look at stage acting, theatrical acting as the thing. That this was how it was done 3,000, 4,000 years ago when it first came about as an art, and there's theater acting, and everything else comes after. Do you have one of those biases like that, or do you think
No,
no?
no, no. I think everything has its has its fulfillment. Everything has its use. Everything can be wonderful or crap.
Hmm.
Every single. I mean, when I was very, very busy and very, very successful as an actress, people were saying to me, and I was playing big theatres and all the rest of it. People were saying to me, "Oh, that's so wonderful that you're doing that." And I just remember turning to my mum and saying, "You know what I really like doing? I like doing theatre, but in small theatres, in community theatres.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I really love. I mean, I was doing big, you know, I did Constanza in Amadeus, and I was playing 3,000 seats and touring all around the UK, and it was great. Every genre has its own challenges and has its own rewards. Really, I love filming as
Uh-huh.
well. I mean, and I've done television, and I've done television sitcoms in front of a live audience. I mean, you name it, I've done it.
So have you done, like, for example, commercial voiceovers, and have you done anything?
Never done that. You just caught me out on that. But do you know why I've never done that? It's because I said I didn't want to do it.
Mm.
And I'll tell you why. because I got to a point as an actress when I was going up 5 or 6 times a week for commercials. That was my life. It wasn't acting or creating. It was actually getting dressed up, putting makeup on, going to the West End and doing commercials. And I just went back to my agent, who I left shortly afterwards, and said, I don't ever want to go up for a commercial again, ever. And then they come back and say, yes, but what if it's a commercial for Save the Children? Or what if it's a commercial for something really, really. And I just said, I'm not doing any commercials ever again. I did a few. And I thought, I don't want to go up for them. I don't want that to be my life. And shortly after that, I left that agent. I just don't do commercials.
So let me ask you then, let me broaden back out to art in general, because when I've spoken with many artists and in a number of these interviews that I've done, a lot of the artists, well, not a lot of them, but some of them have some religious belief. I interviewed a woman who's a Baha'i. I interviewed a guy who was converted to Judaism, another one who's you'd consider more New Age-ish. And for a lot of them, art, creativity is somehow an extension of their religious belief. Are you someone who's religious? Do you have the idea that some people do, that art is your religion, that this is what you were meant to do, and this is the most essential thing that you can do? In other words, what is your take about art and religion? Are they two sides of the same coin?
Well, I mean, on a bad day, I'm an atheist, agnostic, and on a good day, I'm a pantheist. I mean, I don't like belief systems, whatever they are, even if they're Buddhist. I don't like any kind of organized religion at all. Um, and it's interesting that you say, is that my religion? I hate the word religion. I would say no. It's just something I love doing, like people like doing gardening, painting. Maybe people would say gardening was their religion. I don't know, but I wouldn't. That's not a phrase I would use about myself.
How about the political? Because in looking you up, you seem to have a strong political bent, what most people would consider a progressive, liberal kind of bent. To what degree does your art interact with your political belief systems and vice versa?
98.9%. Can I be more specific than that? I am a socialist feminist, social democrat feminist. I have very strong, and I write plays because there are things I want to change and because I'm angry. And if I write a play that is not motivated from me being angry or wanting to change something, it's usually not a very good play, and I usually, I don't move forward with it.
When you take on a character, how do you approach getting into the character, behind the eyes, say? I've had some actors say, well, it's just a job, you pretend. I think Laurence Olivier famously said something like, just act. Whereas other people, they're going to take 3 months and they're going to lose 60 pounds and they're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and they're going to think that they were raised by wolves to get into the role, kind of thing. Are you somewhere in between those two extremes, or?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like to get into character. You see, when you do with Mike Lee work, the first thing you do is I'd never heard that phrase at RADA, but the phrase of getting into character, I definitely get into character, and I definitely have my process that I do, which is that first of all, I interrogate the text for every single fact about the character that there is there. I.e., they have a limp, they have blue eyes, they don't like cake, they hate their father. I will interrogate the text for all of that and build up a dossier on all of the material facts that are there. And so that's one stage of my work. The second stage of my work is who am I? And so I will construct an imaginative backstory, which will change as my work develops. But I will get a backstory that is personal to me, a complete backstory from when they're born to when their play is. And that's my starting point. And then when I'm acting, before I go on stage, I I always have to know who I am, where am I, what is the time, what are the given circumstances, what is my relationship, all the Uta Hagen things that I probably did before. By the way, it makes it sound as if I'm like, I've got me Uta Hagen book there. I haven't read that damn book for 40 years. I might have misremembered it. But I've got my own process that was inspired by that book.
Well, I've said this often to young writers. I say, you have to learn the rules of writing, but to become a great writer, you have to forget them. You have to move beyond them. Is that similar in acting?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, definitely. And the great phrase that I've always taken at the end of all your research, at the end of everything else, at the end of knowing the character, playing the situation and every single thing else, moment to moment subjective experience. That's my phrase, moment to moment subjective experience as that character in that situation. And so that is very liberating, because you just everything has to just go, because you can't take your research into moment to moment, that it's all gone. So you're just in the moment.
So is your approach to character different as the creator, the writer, than it is as the actor? Because as the actor, you may be doing your own words. More than likely, you're doing Mike Lee's words or whatnot. So do you come from are you at 180 degrees from each other if you're the writer or just the actor?
How I work as a writer is totally different to how I work as there's no correlation between the two things. Okay. It's a whole different ball game. I mean, I think that why I am a good playwright, which I think I am, is because I think all good playwrights should be actors before they write plays. I think nobody should be able to write a play until they've done 5 years in rep. And then when you've done that, then you can write a play. I mean, obviously, I was a very busy actress for a long while, for 10 years before I started writing. And being a working actress has obviously informed what I do. I'll tell you something interesting about my play, The Bogus Woman. The actress plays 60 characters. And when I wrote that play, I mean, it is the Everest of an acting performance, because you play absolutely everything in it. And when I wrote that play, to begin with, it's not possible. People say, you can't really do that. You can't get one actress to do all that. Whereas I knew, because I was an actress and they weren't, that most actresses are completely underused anyway. Most of us were only using 5% of our capability and ability. And I knew an actress could play 60 parts, because I could. And if I could do it, I don't see why lots and lots and lots of other actresses couldn't do it either. And of course, she did do it, and it was brilliant. And so I write to actors. I write very ambitiously for actors, for sure.
So someone, I think it might have been John Huston, the filmmaker, said something along the lines that a great film consists of 5 or 6 great scenes, and then everything else is just strung together there. And I think 4 weeks ago today, for example, I had to euthanize my oldest cat. And I brought him into the emergency vet thing, and they have this little death room where you hold the cat and for a few minutes, and they'll put him to sleep. And a song came on, the song from the Sound of Music, Edelweiss, Edelweiss, Edelweiss. And now that cat, in the last 2 or 3 minutes of his life, that was sort of his theme song. Now, if I hear that. But it's a great kind of thing that I'll probably use in a play or a novel or a short story or a poem or whatnot. And I'm wondering, do you have those sort of little building blocks when when something happens to you, if you're in a cafe or something and someone does something, or you overhear a conversation, you say, that's something that I could use in this play or in that performance or something?
Definitely, but more important that what you're talking about in that building blocks is because, of course, since the pandemic in 2019, I've been making films because I had to. You know, I got a grant to do Storm of the Opera to tour Texas with
Hmm.
it, and I either had to reinvent it, and I invented this very, very rough bricolage. But since I've been making films, which I've been doing since 2019, I'm funded to do it, I would say, as a novice, new, completely ignorant filmmaker, what you've just described, your Edelweiss moment, I think as a filmmaker, rather than as an actress and as a playwright, those are what I'm using now.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, I went to Berlin at the beginning of 2023 to do a film in collaboration with an art film workshop over there. And what I did was I did guerrilla filming. Instead of I knew it was going to be about Eugene Onegin and about the letters, and it's going to be about older people
Hmm.
and how they've loved when they were young and they meet when they're older. And instead of having, I just had the premise of the film, and I just went and I guerrilla shot around Berlin, and I didn't, and I just, for example, there was a table outside a restaurant that was lit, so I went and sat on it. And so for filmmaking,
Hmm.
what you describe as that for filmmaking, I just think everybody has to have their mobile phone on you, so that if you see something
Hmm.
and it's just amazing, film it. And you can use it in a film somewhere. At some point, you'll come across some film and say, hey, yeah, my Edelweiss moment, I can use that in this film. It'll be in a completely different context, but it will be something meaningful and I can use it. So, because I'm making films now, which is, who would have guessed it?
Yeah, I I know. It's like if you've ever read Kurt Vonnegut novels, Kurt Vonnegut, the most famous one is Slaughterhouse-Five, where Billy Pilgrim trips through time. When I had that Edelweiss moment, I thought back to the year 2001 when my wife and I bought a Honda at a dealership, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm 36 years old now. I wonder when I'll have this next moment of self-awareness about something. And I've had a handful of them. The last one being a month ago with this Edelweiss moment. And the way you kind of string things, because you look at sort of life as this series of events that coming out and whatnot. And it's just interesting. Are there a handful of events that have happened in your life that you have yet to use within your art that you're just waiting for? The right film, the right role, the right poem, the right play.
Yes, but I'm not going to tell you what they are.
Okay, that's fair enough. Um, Earlier, you'd mentioned that actresses are underused, and then you mentioned old people, and this is one of the things that, especially here in America, one of the reasons that I don't really watch much television and most Hollywood films. I mean, I'll watch older films or Criterion Collection is because we don't see three-dimensional women. We don't see three-dimensional minority characters. I mean, we don't even see three-dimensional white males. Everyone has been, but it's even worse. And old people might as well not exist. They may as well be Native Americans out on a reservation that no one sees. Um, what what is this obsession? Don't get me wrong. I like looking at a Halle Berry. I like looking at a beautiful Grace Kelly actress or whatnot. But I don't want to watch it all the time. I want to. If you look at someone who's a hero in war or someone who saves orphans from an orphanage, they don't look like Brad Pitt. They look more like me. Um, so, is there a kind of frustration that you feel that in most of popular art that's foisted upon people, we don't really get a representation of the reality of whatever year it is, 2024 now? And
Well,
how
of
do you
course, I've
combat
only
that
been
in your
old
art?
recently.
Yeah.
So I can't talk with any great. I've only been old fairly recently. I can't talk with a great deal of expertise about it. But the reason why we started Mama Kia, which is my theatre company,
Yeah.
was because I was 40 odd, wasn't I, when we started Mama Kia? And I could see that I was being offered less and less interesting parts, complex parts. And I was starting to be offered things on television that I was repeating myself.
Yeah.
I was being asked to repeat myself. I was much less complex.
Hmm.
And so that's why we did Mama Kia. Mama Kia Theatre Company spotlights neglected human rights issues,
Hmm.
but also champions older actresses, older performers, but we mainly actresses because it's a woman-led theatre company. So I work with older actresses that, and I write very complex, interesting parts for them. Really, in which they are the central leading character.
Well, do you think that it's a symptom of the stupidity of Western society? Because obviously, a woman who's 65 or 70, or a man of 65 or 70, is going to, by necessity, unless they're a total boob, they're by necessity going to be more complex than their 20 or 25-year-old selves.
Oh no, it's much worse than that. It's an actual fact that old people are repulsive to young filmmakers. I'm afraid, it's much worse than that.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they are, I'm afraid they are, and they are of no interest, and they're not sexy, and it's just, I'm afraid it's just symptomatic of a corrupt world, really,
So,
you know.
in other than yourself writing for it, how do you promote this with Mama? And first, what does Mama Kia mean? Why did you start it? And how do you combat that?
Well, Mama Kia is the lunar goddess of change,
Uh-huh.
and so we want
Is
you.
that an Aztec goddess?
Yeah,
Aztec.
yeah, goddess of change, lunar goddess of change, and it's a political theatre company, and women are not free anywhere in the world unless all women in the world are free. And Theatre for Change is what we are called, a political theatre company. I mean, looking back on it now, it's too late to change it now. It's probably a bit new agey and a bit airy fairy, and and all the rest of it. But we called it, and I've stuck with it. So yeah, so that's why I called it that. What else did you say? You said you gave me two other questions. So that's why we called it Mama Kia.
Yeah, and how do you what was the how do you start it, and then what do you, other than your own writing, how do you combat it? The,
Well, I started it with a great friend of mine called Lucinda Gain, who very sadly died. I wrote my play Bones for her, and she died, and I was completely at sea when she went because our partnership, the company really depended on the partnership. It's evolved and changed since then, and well, I write plays that spotlight human rights abuses. I wrote The Bogus Woman, which dealt with the whole kind of asylums thing years and years before anybody else was writing about it. I wrote it. I wrote Bites, which looked at Afghanistan, and it compared fundamentalist America with fundamentalist Afghanistan and all the rest of it. And I wrote Bones, which was about truth and reconciliation. And so I deal with meaty stuff, difficult issues, and I put older women right at the centre of those things, of those
so
issues.
so let me just step back from the arts just for a moment. When you deal with something like 2 years ago, the start of the Ukraine-Russian war, or late last year, the start of the Gaza-Israel war, do you see? Do you look at it as there's such stories here? How do you approach that then? Have you ever written about, let's say, wartime stuff?
I wrote Bites, which is supposed to be a feast, but it deals with Afghanistan
Uh-huh.
and the end of the world, the last diner at the end of the world, and it kind of compares a kind of apocalyptic dystopian Texas with what is going on in Afghanistan, and it has so it's 7 courses really. So having written that play, which is my open play about war, I suppose it's very difficult to say. I mean, I'm so upset. You know, I say it's good to be angry,
Uh-huh.
and then that stimulates you to write.
Mhm.
But sometimes you're not always red hot anger. You don't always, especially as you get older, you don't always feel red hot anger for things. And we're doing a thing in 2024 which is called Women in War,
Uh-huh.
which is going to be because I do mentoring women writers, and that is we're gonna get women's ideas of what it can be anything, but it's women in war. I imagine people will touch on Gaza and Ukraine, But the piece that I've done that might be of most interest to you is a play called Entering Incomplete Map Data Area, which is about white privilege and guns and race. And I've done a short version of that. I took it to New York to the Jefferson Market Theatre, and we did a reading. I turned it into a full-length play that I've had no success with at all. But the short play, which is about 50 minutes, seems to work very, very well. And it's about a shooting of and it's about a white Texas privileged couple, university lecturer and a lawyer, who go to Livingston in Texas, and they build a Bauhaus glass ranch. They build this beautiful glass ranch, and one night the knock on the door, and it's what they think is a young black man, but in actual fact it's a very tall, strong black woman. And she knocks on the door, and she's got a handkerchief. She's bleeding from the head, and she's very dirty. And she comes in with this story of being in an accident with a deer crossing the road, and she's fallen into the hole where she's building an orchid house. And it's really about what happens to her in the course of the next few hours. And that is a play I'm working on, and that came out of me living in Houston.
So what was, because I live in the Austin, Texas area, and I have for 20 years now. When did you leave Texas to go back to the UK?
2019.
Okay, so you missed the snowstorm of a few years ago, when a term called Third World Texas. I mean, the state was paralyzed by a couple of inches of snow because the idiots that run the Texas state government they didn't invest in plows. They didn't know how to salt the roads.
I think I just missed that.
Yeah,
I think we.
And right now today, as we're recording this, the temperature's down into the teens, and people are acting that they're buying everything at the stores for, God forbid, for a 2 or 3 day cold spell, and do you wrap your pipes that are outside? Do you do this and whatnot? And it's Texas. What was your impression of Texas, number one, and what was your impression of Texas vis-a-vis the whole of the USA, if you've lived or worked in?
Well, it was so interesting because it was from 2002 that for a long time, he wasn't my husband then, he was my partner, was coming over and working. And when I first came to Texas, it was like, I was expecting it like Dallas, because I'd watched Dallas on the TV. I thought it was going to be this high-powered, this place. And I arrived, and it was like dirt roads. And the thing that my husband always says was the wiring of the streets was so, loose, and it looked like a third world country. I was gobsmacked. And also the fact that you'd have like all these really like big, nice houses. This was we lived in Montrose, by the way.
Yeah.
But we lived somewhere. And then there was like the little whorehouse, painted all grey in the middle. And I couldn't get my head around this weird old place. I just thought, this is like so strange. Yeah. I couldn't fathom what it was like. And I really didn't want to live there full time. And me and my partner split up, actually. He was my partner then, and I went back to the UK, and I missed him, but I still wasn't kind of like, in love with Texas or anything. And then when I came back and I really invested in Houston, by that time we were living in Montrose, which is a groovy place to live because it's a liberal enclave. It's very lots of tattoo parlors, and it's and gay. It's very liberal. It feels, and I felt very at home there. And you can walk around there, and I walked around everywhere, and it was my home, and I loved it. And I really like. I thought I was. The Texas of mythology, is not like the people when you meet them, and even when you meet, Trump supporters and everything, they were. I was lucky enough to meet nice people who were kind, They were kind and they were nice. And I really came to love my life there. From 2015 to 2019, I did some great work. I worked with some lovely people, and I enjoyed my life. I enjoyed my life there. But to begin with, no, I just couldn't get my head around it. Third world country, I thought.
Yeah, well, Texas has this odd plantation mentality. You actually, if you're a working class person, you pay more in taxes than you did if you from New York or from Minnesota, the two other states I've lived in, and you get nothing back in terms of services. And it's also got this, but yet oddly enough, the individual people are very friendly, but you'll get people who, like, for example, I live in a subdivision. Yeah, I've had a few Muslims live next door. There's a number of black people in my neighborhood, Hispanics. So this is what, quote unquote, the American dream is like, or supposed to be when I was growing up, that everyone, will prosper. But yet it isn't that way when you deal with governments. It isn't that way. I mean, what you mentioned, right down the road where I am, you'll see mansions that would be $1.5 million, and then literally the next lot over, it's a goddamn slum. So, Kay, let's turn to your writing. You mentioned Beckett as far as playwriting. Before I talk about poetry, let me just sort of segue by asking you about Shakespeare. You mentioned that Beckett is your idea of the ideal playwright, but have you done Shakespearean theater, and what is your take on Shakespeare? Because for me, as both a writer and also someone who appreciates theater, I'd like to see sort of a 50-year global moratorium on Shakespeare productions to allow other things to get rooted. Because I think a lot of actors, I think a lot of playwrights, I think a lot of production companies just fall back on Shakespeare because it's an easy sell. What is your take on Shakespeare as the artist and also as the phenomenon?
Well, okay, where do I start on all of that? I mean, when I was a kid and I got my complete works of Shakespeare and I was applying for RADA, you had to choose your audition speech.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and I was like this very little kid with paper doll, hairdo, and I weighed under 7 stone, and I chose Lady Macbeth. And I did my Lady Macbeth audition in, red clogs and a yellow baby doll dress. And I think it must have worked because I got in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did, what was the Hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? And I got off on it. My God, I loved it. And we did Hamlet because for a Macbeth for school, and I loved them. And I loved, even if I didn't understand what I was saying, I loved saying the words. And then I went to RADA, which of course is very Shakespeare centric, but I never got to play any. They didn't cast me in those parts when I actually got to RADA. And when I came out of RADA, I played Viola in 12th Night. Oh, I was cast as Rosalind, but I then didn't get to play that because I got a better job. Then I went to do Viola in 12th Night, which I did at the Nottingham Playhouse, which then was a very esteemed rep company run by Sir Richard Eyre. And I did Viola there. And I was hopeless, absolutely hopeless. I think I had, I don't know, I was overthinking it. I was scared of it. I don't think I was very good at all. I had a very, very posh Tony Sher, who was a very esteemed, played Malvolio. Tim Pigott-Smith, who's very posh, played Orsino. And I just don't think I was very good. And I think I lost my confidence. I did that in front of great big theatre, playing viola and all the rest of it, and wasn't happy with my performance. And I've really not sought out Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. I had an audition for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and while they were getting me to prepare a scene, these two young men were talking over. I felt like saying, "Shut up! You've told me to prepare something," and I thought, "No, I'm not getting it." I'm not digging this. And so really not being very good. I don't think I was a very good viola. I really haven't had a great deal of interest. Um, of course, now I could play all those, Queen Mab and all those kind of crazy people and do Coriolanus. And maybe even I could play all the men now because, of course, women are playing men's parts. But I haven't been asked to do it. And it's not something that's been in my sphere of work particularly.
Mm-hmm.
But, I wouldn't like queue for 3 hours to see a Shakespeare performance. I definitely don't want to see Twelfth Night ever again, or As You Like It. Sorry, no, enough. Or Midsummer Night's Dream, really, enough of it. Been there, done that. I might go and see Coriolanus or Titus Andronicus, or I still love Hamlet and Macbeth, I must say. So, I'm not into the comedies really, I have to be honest. Or even the histories much.
Me neither.
The meaty kind of stuff. Yeah, I'd like to do that. Yeah.
So, but you do write in blank verse, you said. So, is everything 100% in blank verse, or do you switch off prose with blank verse to get some kind of dialectic effect, maybe?
It varies. I mean, Bogus Woman was more or less kind of blank verse all the way through from beginning to end. I've just written a play that's going to be workshopped at the end of February, and that's naturalistic dialogue completely, but it's got subtext, which is woodland scenes, which is verse. So, but I feel that I'm better when I write in verse. It seems to constrain me, curb my enthusiasm, pull me in, force me. It imposes a discipline on me, and. But having said that, I have had as I wrote a thing called The Kill Buyer, and I wrote it all in verse, and I was told nobody's going to publish that because there's not enough words on a page now. So you won't get that published. I really was told that, and I found that so dispiriting, and that's partly why I went back to writing prose. I was actually told by a publisher, by them saying, no, we like it, but no, you'd have to change the format. And I don't want to change the format.
So, blank verse, for better or worse, though, it says, this is artifice. Because there isn't a natural list. It's not like Martin Scorsese film or John Cassavetes, or Mike Lee. So when you're doing that, you are basically lifting the play up and saying, you're not trying to draw the audience into the what they would call the diegetic universe of the play. You're saying this is artifice. Deal with it. Is what does that advantage does that give you, if any?
Well, I am Brechtian. I'm a Brechtian. I'm interested in the whole process of how you make art. I think that's the most wonderful thing. I'm not interested in smoke and mirror unless the smoke and mirror is revealed to be smoke and mirror and it becomes part of it. The whole artifice of art interests me and fascinates me. And yeah, it most certainly does. I was going to say something really interesting a minute ago to you, but never mind, it'll come back to me.
Well, I've always said that art is more of a verb than a noun, in that it's the how you do something. You can have two. You could say, my wife, for example, said she watched this movie on Criterion about that famous airplane crash in the Andes back in the 70s. And then they made a schlocky film about it a few years later, and now they've redone it to, I guess, a little bit better of a film or whatnot, because it actually used South American actors. But it's how the thing is done. You can take two actors, one is going to be terrible, one might be great, but you can have a great actor that can make an average written work look great by the force of their ability, and you can have a bad actor that could take Streetcar Named Desire and make it a comic schlock. So do you agree with me when I say about the verb and the noun thing with
Definitely, totally, absolutely, I totally agree with that. I mean, and the extended conversation from what you're saying is that I like epic theatre, I like creating epic theatre, but I mean, The Bogus Woman is an epic piece of theatre. It's actually there on YouTube, and you can go and watch it. It's performed by Noma Dumezwini, who became Hermione, who acted Hermione in the Harry Potter play. Brilliant actress, but that is one performer playing 60 parts, and it's a big epic piece. I like things to be big. A lot of my plays, I like big themes. I like big panoramas. You know that thing that you talked about, that wouldn't that make a great play? You could make a great play out of that because it would be so difficult to do.
Yeah.
People eating each other and snowy landscape and plains. I mean, that really attracts me.
I'm just looking up here because I wanted to ask you about. I'd mentioned earlier Orson Welles, and I wanted to ask you about two of his films. Let me just look something up here. One, come on, I've seen Citizen Kane. Let's see here. Oh, for God's sakes. What's the name of the movie? Chimes at Midnight. So I wanted to ask you about two particular Welles films, since you're talking about big and whatnot. Have you ever seen Chimes at Midnight by Orson Welles?
No.
I would say do it. Do it.
Well,
It is the best Shakespeare adaptation you will ever see, because Orson Welles says, I'm not afraid to take Shakespeare, and because he takes Falstaff, who's a minor character in like 4 or 5 of the plays, and he makes him the central character with Prince Hal. And when I saw that, I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, this is what you can do. And it's a low budget movie. It isn't a sword and sandal Charlton Heston epic from the 60s. It was made in the 60s, but it's a low budget film. And this is what a great mind can do. And I wanted to ask you if you've seen another Welles film, because I would recommend watching this. If you have Netflix, watch The Other Side of the Wind, the restored version. It was the last one of the.
I am not a filmy, as you can tell,
Yeah.
because I've only becoming interested in film since 2019.
As
But
a filmmaker,
I've heard of that. I've heard of that.
Yeah, as a filmmaker, watch it, because, again, one of the things that that you see in a lot of the arts is, and especially the pop arts, you look at the Rolling Stones as the perfect example. They were great for what, 15, 20 years, 40 years, they've just been running on fumes. But here you see Welles as a 65, 70-year-old man. He's making more dynamic, more vivid films than with This Other Side of the Wind, which is a film which is critiquing a film within the film. And, I mean, to me, if we're talking filmmaking, Orson Welles is not only one of the great films, but he's one of the 4 or 5 greatest artists of the 20th century. It's just magnificent. So I would say just look at what he does in those 2 films, what he does with Shakespeare, and then what he does as an old man making a film that if you didn't know as a 70-year-old man that was making this film, you'd be like,
I will watch them.
Yeah. Okay.
I will watch them. They sound amazing.
So let's turn to your poetry here. You'd mentioned I'd mentioned like Philip Larkin. So how did you get into poetry? Was it just
Look, I think this is a bit of a I don't know how that's. I mean, I think I'm a poet because I write in verse, but I've never had a selection of poems published.
Okay.
Had 7 plays written in verse or whatever, more than that published, and so it's a bit of a false pretense, isn't it? Really, I mean, to say that I'm a poet, I think I am, but I don't have. You can't go up and Google me and get my selections of it.
Okay.
But I have actually got an unpublished novella in verse that is about the first 5. It's about the beginning of my life, which I've written. And as I said, we couldn't, because it was the way it was done on a page. People were interested in publishing, but I've still got hope for it. I've not given up on that.
Well, I have to ask you.
Never talk so much all at one go. I'm losing my voice.
Well, we'll go for maybe another 15, 20 minutes. I won't stress you too much. But have you ever read, speaking of novels in verse, have you ever read Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Aurora Leigh?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Because if you want to talk about proto-feminist novel, I've said to people over the years, my wife, I got her to read it, other young, especially female, but other young writers that have contacted me, I said, you know, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, for my money, way better than Emily Dickinson. If I had to, if, you know, and this is, I'm not trying to slag on Emily Dickinson, but Browning, I think, was a better writer overall and a better poet. And I think her sonnets to the Portuguese are the equal of anything that Shakespeare did.
It was a long time ago since I read O'Reilly, but I agree. I mean, I do remember it, and I do think it's brilliant. Mine is a novella in verse
Okay.
because I had to shake up my practice, and I wanted to write something different. And so I've got that, and it's quite long, and I've not given up on that. I'm going to try and get that out there and get people to read it.
So let me just ask, I want to ask a couple more questions about acting, and then I want to just ask you for any maybe anecdotes that you'd want to share. Uh, Here in the U.S., SAG-AFTRA are the two major acting unions. Uh, uh, do you have equivalents in the UK? Is there a SAG UK or one? And are
Oh,
you
there's
a union member?
equity. No, there's what but nowadays you don't have to be a member of it. When I was a young actress starting out,
Uh-huh,
you couldn't get an acting job unless you were a member of equity.
uh-huh,
It was very much, swings and, it was very odd.
uh-huh,
Chicken and egg, it was a
uh-huh,
difficult situation. But I did a short film that I shot in New York, and everybody had to be SAG-AFTRA on that. Nobody would work on it. So I came across SAG-AFTRA there, and thought, my God, they look after their people there because they really were looking after them.
uh-huh.
So
So,
it was hard to make work in New York because of SAG-AFTRA, but I
okay.
did it.
But you are a union member, though, are you not?
Yeah, equity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so just so that for younger actors, can you explain the benefits of it? Because we live in a society here in the U.S. where unions are downgraded. What benefits have you gotten as a
Well,
union?
that is a very controversial statement to make
Okay.
because these days in Britain, people don't think there's very much benefit to being a member of Equity.
Oh.
Because, as I said, it used to be, but now anybody can join Equity. And, I wish I could be more positive here because I'm a socialist. I'm a total believer in unions. I'm a total believer in a working population gaining strength
Uh-huh.
from unity and from being together. But I don't know if the rail union over here, I could talk about that. They do very well for their members, but I can't, in all honesty, say that I think Equity does very well for its members. But I'm a great believer that we should all join unions. Yeah.
So, but can you just say why is it because they I mean they're just not effective as a unit?
Well, I mean, I phoned up quite recently. Nobody rang rang me back.
Uh,
I rang up and I had a friend who had fallen on hard times, and I said you must get in touch with Equity, and nobody helped her or anything. So I'm not here as an advertisement for Equity, but
okay.
I'm certainly here as an advertisement for unions and for joining a union and being strong together for sure. It's just not working with Equity at the moment.
Okay. Um, so let's wrap this up by talking, if I can ask you. Um, you mentioned Mike Lee. Let's start with him, and you mentioned your experience with. So you only did that one play for a day with him.
I only did one play, but then I went on to do Kathy in Wuthering Heights.
Okay.
As an actress, I went on to play the most iconic, the best part in the world with the BBC production. It was I left that and then I went to do it. It was like chalk and cheese,
Hmm.
two experiences.
So, uh, what was your experience? You said or you implied earlier that with aging, actresses don't get the roles they did, but also too, you also I think there was the implication that you were not someone who was at ease with doing cheesecake roles, if you will. That you were more of a serious actor. Does that limit you? In terms of getting roles.
Well, I didn't have the luxury after 10 years of what parts I wanted, I mean, I did in the first 10 years, I was able to choose. And I was a young leading lady and a young leading actress. And I was very, very lucky. I'm not dissing it at all. I got to play some fantastic part like Viola in Twelfth Night at Nottingham Playhouse, with Anthony Sher and
Mm.
Kathy in Wuthering Heights, for the BBC. I played a lot of leading roles, and and I enjoyed that. But one wants to not be put in a box, do you? I mean, I played Kathy in Wuthering Heights, and to say I was thrilled to get that part because I was a Bronte, fan.
Hmm.
But I wasn't allowed to. I had no leeway with what I could do with that part, and I felt like I was in a straitjacket at the BBC with it. And it's there, it's out there, and I look at it and I'm full of pain. There's only one scene that he kind of like give me my head, and I could do what I wanted. And it was like the BBC. It was just like a costume drama at the BBC seemed to want a certain type of person and performer, and I wasn't that kind of person. I didn't feel at home. I didn't feel at home doing it with that. To get a wonderful part like that, Taffy in Wuthering Heights, incredible part, BBC, and I just was not happy. Um, I mean, I'll tell you a good instance of what of I was in the first 2 weeks we were rehearsing, and I had a bit where I had to jump up and throw myself into this person's arms, and the person will be nameless. Stop the rehearsal. I said, I don't think you're going to be able to do that because I've got a ponytail in the back of my thing, so you're not actually going to be able to. And that kind of typifies. If I think of that moment, that typifies my time. I felt like I was in a straitjacket. I think I
So,
look pretty miserable in a lot of it as well.
so, how many roles? What percentage of roles, especially early on, but overall, I guess, have you done for the money, and have you regretted what? Is
I
there
haven't
any?
done anything for the money.
No.
No, 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 no. I don't remember thinking I've done that for the. I didn't do the commercials for the money. I didn't do them. I just did it because I was a jobbing working actress, and but I haven't done anything specifically for the money. Every job I've done because I wanted to do it. Even the jobs you might think I did for the money. I did a sitcom in Mother's Ruin. I did it because it was a fun script. It made me laugh. It didn't make anybody else laugh. It was a complete failure. But no, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm a saint and that's wonderful and what a fantastic artist I am and all the rest of it. But no, I've always done stuff I wanted to do.
Have there been roles where you're like, oh, I'm going to work with so and so actor or director, and then at the end you're like, God, this is a letdown. And if so, for what reason?
Well, I'm not going to mention who they are,
Okay.
am I?
No.
Um, no, I don't think. I don't think I've really had a situation like that. No, I think people have. I think there's one person who's very, very famous. I thought, God, she's boring. She must be the most boring woman, and she's like an icon, and still is an icon. And I was talking to her, and I thought, yeah, really boring. She's really, really. She is the most boring woman in the world.
um, so how do you judge a script and or a character that you'd want to do something? Is it obvious from the beginning? You read, or do you read it and then you say, well, let me read it again? And have you how many roles, for example, have you said, nah, this yeah, it doesn't do anything for me?
Not many.
No.
Not many. Because although one doesn't do things for money, one can find good things in a lot of stuff. Like I said, I did a sitcom.
Uh-huh.
Um, I mean, I didn't do that for money, although it was very good money, and I was absolutely broke. I think I had 30 quid in the bank or something. And then I went up to being put up at Granada. But I did it because I'd never done a sitcom, I'd done funny things. I'd worked with Victoria Wood, but I'd never done an actual sitcom, and I wanted to see what it was like, and I did it. And the same, I did a soap. I'd never done a soap before, and I thought, I wonder what this is like. I did Family Affairs, and I was a repeat guest, and I did that for 2 years, and I did it, and I found both those jobs, which were not high art jobs at all, enjoyable, and I did a good job in it, and both things. I was proud of what I did in both of them, and I enjoyed it. Don't forget, I was a jobbing actress. I don't think I'm a jobbing writer, but at all. But I'm a jobbing actress. I do, as long as I like the look of it, I'll do it.
So do you prefer roles where the director or the writer is open to suggestions, that is amenable, that there's improvisation. I'm not the improvisation where you go over something 20 times to get to the thing, but for example, if at the last moment you say, well, maybe if I glance over his right shoulder, it'll do the. And what percentage of directors that you've worked with are amenable to such things?
Not many,
Yeah.
really, to be absolutely honest. I mean, I've worked with some who are very nice people and are very open to discussion and collaborate. No, no, maybe that was unfair to say. No, I have worked with them. Looking back on it now, no, I have worked with them who are very interested in collaboration. It's very interesting because you get directors, you work with directors, and of course I'm a director because I direct myself, and they, part of their fun is they want to mold the actor, and they're very interested in, teasing the performance out of them
Hmm.
and all the rest of it. And I like directors who don't do that, they're directors because they're very interested in the great big panoramic vision, and they cast brilliantly. And once they cast you, they let you do your thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like that because I think if you cast a really good actor, don't mess with them too much because, they know what they're doing. And I don't like, I mean, I've worked with one director who she worked a lot with students. Actually, she worked. I won't say where she worked, but she worked a lot with students, so she was used to giving lots of tips. And she kept like giving me tips about the bloody thing and telling me what to do, And I thought, I know what to do. I'm like, I was in my 40s. I know what to do. Stop telling me, giving me tips. You do it then. If you've got so many tips, you do it. For me, I like cast brilliant actors, and then as a director, it's wonderful because then you've got that in your work, your work belt, and you can think about the vision, the visual of the piece, how it looks, how it sounds, how they come together, and you're not faffing about with their moment to moment. You're just letting them be free and be creative.
Yeah, I found that I think that when you're doing something like a theater or a film, it's by necessity a collaborative art. It's not like you're writing a novel and you're banging away on your keyboard by yourself. So I would think that a director, a good director, would want to take advantage of that collaborative mindset.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. You're absolutely right. They do. They do. Yeah.
Because like infamously, Hitchcock said actors were like chattel. But it seems to me that you should do like that. I mean, as you stated. I'm just trying to let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to particularly ask about you. Oh, let me one thing before we end this. When it comes to acting, and would fall under the advice of sort of advice you might or the advice you might give a younger actor. I've always said that with writing, when young writers write me, you shouldn't have hard and fast rules, just general principles that you approach that gives you a flexibility. Would you say that a similar kind of approach? Nothing you shouldn't approach acting with sort of a hard and fast uh, idea that this is writ in stone, but you should have general principles that become flexible. Is that the way you approach acting?
Definitely. And every single experience and every single is totally different and requires a different approach. I mean, if you've only got one approach to everything, you're going to come a cropper very early on. I mean, every single company is totally different. It has a totally different dynamic. And as an actor, you're not working on your own. You know, I mean, that's bad acting. I've worked with actors who are like that. They've got their, I mean, dare I say it, I've worked with a lot of Meisner actors who are a little bit like that, hey, you know, and they've got their one approach, and it's almost like you being there and being in the room with them, you're treading on their toes because, you're not playing their game the way they want it. No, I think you've got to just be flexible and there aren't hard and fast rules. You can have your process, but your process has to be malleable.
So, finally, let me just ask you then, with Mama Kia or individually, or maybe let's talk. What does the future of the next few years hold for you for both Mama Kia and you yourself individually?
Okay. Well, this is what's on. This is what I've got on board. Um, we did a project, a writing, mentoring women writers project called The Women Who, which we did last year, and we're thinking about trying to do that. We were thinking about doing it for International Women's Day, but we've got availability. I've got a clash. You've got an availability project, but that will be reinvented in some way, and it's working class women's voices, and they're writer performers, and they're brilliant. So that is in abeyance. That's somewhere they're going to be done. I'm going to do a project which is combined with the mentoring women writers, which is Women in War, and that will happen. But that will be a workshop performance, maybe just in the round. I've got a play that I've written that is about feminist women with right wing sons. And I've been wanting to write this play for a long time. And I have just been scuppered. I've not been able to make it work. I don't know whether I don't know why. So so that's having a reading on February the 24th or 5th, and I need feedback on it. I need to improve it. So that's having a reading, and then the play I told you about, Entering Incomplete Data Area, the short play for Mama Kia. I want to put that. I want to get a global majority writer to come in and partner with me and to do the alternative story so that we collaborate. Because I've written the first half from the white privilege point of view. Then I want to see the same story written from the point of the woman who gets shot, Lindsay. I want to see how her point of view, and then I want us to collaborate. And really exciting and fun, I'm going into rehearsal on March the 4th. We've done an intro day for the Rose to Two. And I'm playing, do you know the Rose to Two?
No.
Oh, well, it won't mean anything to you. I'm playing Strega in that, and that's being reinvented and I've got with a wonderful director called Eduardo Beretti, and I'm doing that at the Arcola, and we perform that in April. So it's cool.
So
I mean, I'm old, but I've got red hair and I'm busy.
So the final question I want to ask, since you mentioned that Kathy from Wuthering Heights had been sort of your dream role as a young actor, now if you could play just one more role, if they said this is it, this is the last role, this is the role that everything depends on, what role, what character would you want to play that you haven't?
That's too hard. Come on, that's too hard a question.
Okay.
I mean, what role? I mean, I don't know, Coriolanus or something. I don't know. I mean, I don't know, something huge and epic and out there. That's what I would like to do. I'd have to write it for myself. It doesn't exist.
Okay. Well, let me just say then, it's too bad that you never met Orson Welles, because you would have probably fit right in with him. But I want to thank you, Kay Adshead, for speaking for over an hour and a half with me. I'll get this up later, so good luck in your future endeavors and all.
Lovely. It's been lovely, Dan. I've really enjoyed it. I hope I've not come across too mad.
No, no, no. Your madness is pitch perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.